The Cost of Lies, the Wright Family, and the Dakota War of 1862. 358 souls, that's how many settlers perished in minutes. When the Dakota Sioux erupted in fury on August 20, 1862, a day Minnesota's prairies ran red. Yet amid the carnage, one woman's name echoes through the blood-stained grass. Julia Wright, clutching her children Dora, 6 and George 4, she fled through smoke. As Lake Shech's tranquil waters mirrored flames devouring her cabin, but this wasn't random savagery. Years earlier, her husband, a man John Dakota called Tonkatenza, Great Liar, had orchestrated the cold-blooded murder of Bill Clark over stolen loot, burying him beneath a box elder sapling. Now grown, twisted, and gnarled, had the Wrights' own sins ignited this inferno? And when Julia stumbled into the wilderness, did survival mean condemning her neighbors to slaughter? The answers lie in land deeds, stained with deceit. A child's grave dated 1865 and a haunting question. Was Julia Wright a victim of history, or its architect? Native Legends and History Story dissects the bones of this tragedy. Subscribe as we expose how one family's lies sparked a war that redefined the American frontier. Frost-laden grass crunched beneath Charlie Wobble's boots as he dragged the shovel across the frozen Minnesota earth. 20 paces behind him, John Wright's shadow stretched long across the December snow, his Springfield rifle trained on the box elder sapling. The year was 1861, and Lake Chateau's waters lay silent under a sheet of ice, bearing witness to a secret that would haunt its shores for generations. Deeper Wright commanded, his breath crystallizing in the bitter air. 6 feet ought to do it. His eyes darted toward the horizon, where the last streaks of twilight painted the prairie crimson. Bill Clark's body lay twisted in the gathering shadows, a single bullet hole marking where lead had shattered his spine. The killing had been swift, clinical. Earlier that day, Clark had stormed into Wright's cabin, demanding his share of the stolen bounty. From St. Peter, "You're a thieving bastard, right?" He'd spat alcohol heavy on his breath. "I want what's mine." The argument had escalated until Wright, with calculated precision, had whispered to Charlie, "End it." Word of Clark's disappearance spread through the settlement like prairie fire. Neighbors who once gathered for Sunday suppers now hurried past the Wright homestead with averted eyes. Sarah Peterson, whose cabin stood nearest to Wright's, whispered to her husband at night, "The Dakota loved Bill Clark. They'll come for answers, mark my words." Children were called inside before sunset, and rifle oil became as common as butter on shopping lists. That box elder sapling would become the settlement's silent sentinel. With each passing season, its trunk grew thicker, its branches reaching higher, as if straining to tell the truth. Buried beneath its roots years later, settlers would point to its twisted form, now a massive tree, and whisper about the body that fed its growth. Settlers passing through Lake Chateau in those days would have seen a seemingly ordinary homestead. John Wright's cabin stood proud against the prairie winds, its fresh-hewn logs still golden in the sun. Julia Wright, known for her gentle demeanor, could often be spotted tending to her garden, while 6-year-old Dora, born in 1856, and 4-year-old George played in the yard. But beneath this pastoral facade lay a web of deceit that the Dakota people had already recognized, christening Wright, Tonkatenza, the Great Liar. On December's 1861, Wright's true nature revealed itself in ink and paper. The land office recorded his claim to Hank and Brown's property, filed under his father's name. Wright's signature, bold and deliberate, bore false witness to a legacy of fraud. 4 months later, in April 1862, he would stake another claim, this time to the land he'd occupied since 1859. Building layers of deception, like the annual rings of the box elder, that marked Clark's grave. The settlers' anxiety grew with each passing month. George, who had arrived at Lake Chateau before the Wrights, felt the tension acutely. Clark had friends among the Dakota, he confided to his wife. Before relocating near Iberia in 1861, "They'll come asking questions." Each creaking branch, each shadow at dusk, carried the weight of impending retribution. Julia Wright bore her own burdens in silence as she watched Dora and George chase fireflies in the summer twilight of 1862. Her shoulders carried the weight of her husband's sins. The Dakota who traded at their door would meet her eyes with knowing looks, their words careful, measured. They saw past the warm bread she offered, past her kind smile to the rot that festered beneath their homestead's foundation. The fates would prove cruel to the Wright family. Little Dora, whose laughter once echoed across Lake Chateau's waters, would not live to see womanhood in 1865. Just 3 years after the uprising that would forever change their lives, death would claim her, adding another layer to the family's tragic legacy. Only George would survive to tell the tale, eventually making his way to Seattle, carrying with him memories of prairie fires and broken promises. The box elder sapling grew stronger with each passing season, its roots drinking deep from soil enriched by hidden bones. As August 1862 approached, its leaves whispered warnings that few would heed. Warnings of debts unpaid, of justice deferred, of violence answered with violence. The seeds of tragedy, planted in deceit and watered with blood, were about to bear their terrible fruit. Dawn broke blood red over Minnesota's prairies. On August 19, 1862, near New York, George Lamb's wagon wheels creaked through the morning dew, the sound carrying across the silent grassland. He never saw the shadows moving through the tall grass. 37 arrows found their mark before his body hit the ground. The kind-hearted settler, who had once shared his bread with Dakota children, now lay still in the prairie wind. Miles away, at the Lamb homestead, young Louisa Myers's hand as she pressed against the cabin's rough-hewn walls. The 15-year-old student had watched the horizon darken with smoke signals since dawn. Now, gunfire echoed across the prairie like summer thunder. Her feet, wrapped in cloth to muffle sound, carried her through shadows and creek beds, guided by lessons learned from the very people she now fled. At Lake Chautauqua, Julia Wright's morning began with the echo of war whoops carried on the wind. The breakfast dishes lay unwashed as she hurried Dora and George toward the slough, hoping its choked waters would offer sanctuary. The children's feet sank into black as they stumbled through the wetland. 6-year-old Dora clutched her mother's skirts, while 4-year-old George struggled to keep pace, his tiny boots heavy with marsh water. "Hush now," Julia whispered, pressing her children close, as painted warriors passed within arm's reach of their hiding place. But the reeds that concealed them became their prison. Dakota scouts, reading the wetland signs like an open book, found them huddled in the muck. Strong hands pulled them from their refuge, and Julia, Wright, wife of the great liar, began a journey into captivity that would haunt her until her dying day. The warriors led them to White Lodge's camp, where the air hung thick with wood, smoke, and tension. Other captured settlers huddled in makeshift shelters, their faces hollow with fear and hunger. What transpired in those brutal months would later be described in whispers. The treatment she received at the hands of the Indians cannot be put into words. Julia's once gentle eyes grew hard as stone, watching her children survive on scraps, while autumn painted the prairie gold. But salvation wore unexpected faces. In November 1862, as frost crystallized on lodgepoles, 9 Dakota warriors approached Camp Pierre. Under a flag of truce, Martin Charger led the group. Red Bear, Pretty Bear, Sitting Bear, Swift Bird, One Rib Strikes Fire, Red Dog and Charging Dog flanking him. They came not for war, but mercy. "We bring your people home," Charger announced to the army officers, his breath visible in the cold air. In his camp, Dora Wright slept fitfully beside her mother, unaware that freedom approached on moccasined feet. At camp release, George H. Wright would find his own deliverance, though the scars of captivity would follow him all the way to Seattle in years to come. The November wind caught Julia's thin dress. As she stepped into the army camp, her children's hands clasped tightly in hers. 3 months of captivity had carved new lines in her face, but her spine remained straight as a prairie blade. Behind her, the 9 Dakota rescuers melted back into the landscape morning mist, their names destined to be recorded in history's ledger as men who chose mercy over vengeance. The box elder tree at Lake Chautauqua had shed by its leaves, its branches reaching toward leaden skies, like accusing fingers beneath its roots. Bill Clark's bones lay silent, while above the winds carried the cries of a land torn apart by violence born of lies, greed, and desperate survival. The true cost of John Wright's deceptions would be measured not in land deeds or stolen gold, but in the haunted eyes of his wife and children, forever changed by the summer, when Minnesota's prairies ran red. The winter of 1863 cast long shadows across Lake Shech's frozen surface. In a courthouse in Minnesota, John Wright's voice echoed off bare walls as he pronounced words that would seal his infamy. "I do not care to have a woman occupy my bed who would not die, rather than submit to the treatment she did from the Indians." The divorce papers bore his signature, bold and unrepentant as the day he'd claimed Hank Ann Brown's land. Julia Wright stood before that same judge, her face a mask of dignity that betrayed none of the whispers that followed her through town. Rumors swirled like prairie dust of a child conceived in captivity, of native blood mixing with settler stock. Yet July 1863 found her still at John's side. According to county records, that spoke in dry ink of domestic arrangements while hiding deeper truths. The box elder tree that marked Bill Clark's grave had grown thick enough now to cast shade, its branches reaching toward a future as uncertain as the myths that gathered beneath them. By 1864, Julia's trail grew cold as winter frost. Some said she fled to Nebraska seeking refuge. In a new marriage, others whispered her name had changed to Cartcast, though records would later reveal Ann Julia Cole, not their Julia, had made that journey to Colorado's silver mines. John Wright's path led west to Salt Lake City, where in 1870 Neil Curry found him living among the Mormons. "I have nothing to say about Lake Chattock," Wright told the persistent interviewer, his voice hard as mountain stone. Tales followed him there too. Of a young bride from Austin, Minnesota, abandoned like yesterday's lies, of a man who could no more face his past than he could resurrect from beneath the box elder's roots. The winter of 1880 brought final judgment to the Wright homestead. Local settlers, their axes sharp with necessity, demolished the cabin log by log. Each piece of wood fed winter fires, erasing physical evidence of a tragedy that had reshaped Minnesota's frontier. By spring only, the foundation stones remained silent, witnesses to a history written in blood and betrayal. Time has a way of blurring truth's edges. Julia Wright's fate remains shrouded in mystery, like morning mist over Lake Shech's waters. Did she find peace in Nebraska's endless horizons? Did she carry to her grave secrets that would explain the Dakota's fury? That August morning, the answers lie scattered like ashes across the American frontier, in courthouse basements and family Bibles, in oral histories passed down through generations of both settlers. And Dakota, the box elder, still stands at Lake Chattock, its trunk now wider than a man's embrace. Its roots reach deep into soil that holds more than one man's bones, more than one woman's tears. It stands as testament to a time when lies could ignite wars, when survival meant choosing between honor and life itself, when history's true architects were not the men who wrote the deeds, but the women who bore their consequences. In this retelling of Lake Chatto's darkest chapter, we find echoes of struggles that persist today, of justice delayed, of voices silenced, of truth buried beneath layers of convenience and prejudice. Julia Wright's story reminds us that in the crucible of frontier violence, it was often women who paid the highest price for men's ambitions. Delve deeper into stories that shaped America's frontier. Subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories for more explorations of forgotten voices and hidden truths that continue to echo across our prairies and mountains. Every story matters, every voice deserves to be heard.